become a less, that's become a less part of my, a less common part of my job. But in the same way, you can even, I think people think of networking as going to their, going to conferences or going to things like that and engaging with people around you, but you can even network within your own company. And I think that's something that I've begun to learn more so as I am involved in more cross-functional teams. People around you will move on to other companies and other jobs, and it's always great to maintain those contacts. And a fun fact is that's how I got referred to RegenxBio was by a coworker, a former colleague at Cote Orphan, which was where I did my internship when I was at KGI, and also was where I ended up having my first job. And so Cote Orphan, which was, I guess it no longer exists since we were acquired, was a rare disease regulatory affairs service provider. And my work was writing designations. Really what I've now come to find was a lot of medical writing work. But it got me very familiar with statutes and regulations and how you navigate them when you're trying to formulate a strategy for a product, but also was really good at getting me involved in different types of products. I was working in rare disease, but I could write a designation for a small molecule or for a monoclonal antibody or a gene therapy. And so I got to see the challenges that were involved in that. And I thought it was a really valuable learning experience, especially in a first job for me. And I had started out at Cote Orphan working in business development, but ended up switching to regulatory because I really found that even though I liked business when I had taken a couple of business classes at KGI and really liked it, still found regulatory calling to my heart. And so found myself doing more of that work once about, maybe 6 months into my job. Another really important experience I had at Cote Orphan is being part of an acquisition. We were acquired by, at the time, Quintiles IMS, now IQVIA, in June of 2017. So I'd only been at the company for a year, almost exactly. As a lot of you have heard of IQVIA, maybe some of you haven't, but they are a very large CRO. They have, I believe now, over 50,000 employees worldwide. As a comparison, Cote Orphan, we were about 20 people in total. So it was a very different type of environment, being acquired by a company that large and noticing the changes that occur in a company that has more resources and more people. I'd say the biggest pro I found of working at a large company was that you're not as worried about if your company is going to, survive to the end of the year, or you're not, watching your stock price with some anxiety. It's something that I truly can't emphasize enough, that it's really nice to have money, resources, you have enough people that you have relevant SMEs for almost any type of question you may have. And so it's incredibly valuable to work in that environment, and you can learn a lot. For me, I think the biggest downside to that was the slowness and the bureaucracy. And this is true of any large company. It doesn't matter if it's a big pharma, it doesn't matter. It could be a big non-life science industry company. There's usually a lot more established processes. There's a lot more hoops you have to jump through to get certain things. And it doesn't have the flexibility that a small company can have. And I say this really that there's neither is better or worse. I think it's an important thing for an individual to discover about themselves what environment they flourish in by experiencing that, if you possibly can. I feel fortunate that I got to experience both, because for me, I found that I wanted to work in a small company environment, where I did have that flexibility and I felt like I could get involved in a bit more. And so I found the experience overall to be very eye-opening, and taught me a lot more about the things I wanted in the company I would work for, after IQVIA, but also, what I would want from a role within a small company.
Rebecca, if I could just interject for a moment, I've always sort of gravitated towards smaller companies. What I've found is that smaller companies, there's going to be an infinite number of things that need to be done and only a finite number of people. And from a professional growth standpoint, you get pulled into a lot of areas that you might not have otherwise had an opportunity to participate in, and that helps you grow as a professional. So that's just one perspective.
Absolutely. I thank you for adding that. That is definitely that's the experience I've had. Oh, sorry guys. I just had my screen disconnect. 1 second, some technical difficulties. I'm sure we're all used to that now.
I'll also mention that IQVIA is a very large service provider to the pharma, biotech, and medical device industry. And they're actually a competitor to the company that I've been working with and for about 10 years, Eversana. And these are companies that provide all kinds of services to small and large pharma, biotech, medical device companies. So they're not a pharmaceutical company themselves, but they provide outsourced services to those companies, including contract research activities and supporting clinical trials for companies. So.
Very cool.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you guys for bearing with me on that. So after IQVIA, I joined Glycomimetics, which is a small biotech also based in Rockville, Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C., an oncology and rare disease focused biotech. Also important to note here that I would say, coming out of Côté Orphan, one of the things I was very sure about was that I wanted to continue working in the rare disease space. I'm sure maybe many of you have heard things like this, but in case you haven't, rare disease, regulatory affairs, and clinical development, kind of all development of a rare disease product comes with a lot of interesting challenges. As you might imagine, hard to recruit patients. You're trying to navigate a way through development without, spending a ridiculous amount of money that you won't be able to recoup the cost because of your small patient population. And there are a lot of programs that FDA offers for rare disease products to help expedite development. All of these were things that I found really interesting and wanted to continue to explore in my career. So moving to Glyco, that was a big thing. For me, going to that company was to continue developing my rare disease experience. But at the same time, I wanted to pivot from this medical writing role I had into more of a strategic role. And so that's what this position offered me, allowed me to begin developing my strategy skills. And so at Glyco, my main focus was the regulatory affairs support for a global phase 3 trial in acute myeloid leukemia, which is a rare form of leukemia found in older adults. While I was there, which was I joined Glycomimetics in early 2019, and was there for roughly two and a half years. And so I started out as a specialist, and at the time I left, I was a senior specialist. And the Glyco was an interesting environment. I think for the first time, I was at a larger company than Côté Orphan. We had about 60 employees. But again, much smaller than IQVIA and had that biotech, more flexible feel. So regulatory affairs at Glyco, my work really revolved around getting our phase 3 trial up and running in different areas of the world. So when I joined, the trial was already running in the US. It was also already running in Ireland. During my time there, we opened, we were given clearance, something called a clinical trial application, a CTA. It is the equivalent of an IND with FDA. So we opened CTAs in Italy, the United Kingdom, Spain, France, the Netherlands. That might be it. And that was, then that was it. And so that was a really interesting process for me, and was also really, was very interesting for my development, in that I had been very focused at Côte Orphan on US regulatory affairs. And by the time I was leaving Glycomimetics, I realized that I had developed this very valuable skill set in EU and really ex-US regulatory affairs. That is something I think I'd like to emphasize for anyone going into a role. Always look for something, the opportunities for growth, and where you see in that role something that can fill a gap in your knowledge. For me, that the ex-US experience was something I saw as being really valuable, something I could learn at Glycomimetics, and turned out that was a very valuable skill to develop, and was one of the big reasons RegenxBio offered me the job. They were in dire need of people who had ex-US regulatory experience, as they wanted to take a couple of their programs going into the EU, going to Canada, and being able to speak to that experience and provide that advice was a big part of what got me my job at Regenx. So really, I love Glycomimetics was a fantastic environment for me to flourish in. And that brings me to RegenxBio. So I have now been in my role at Regenx for almost exactly a year. I joined in July of last year. RegenxBio is a gene therapy company focused on the ocular space and the rare disease space. And sometimes those intersect. I had always, had always wanted to be at the cutting edge of medicine. And to me, gene therapy fit that niche almost more than anything else. This idea that we can develop these therapies to treat something that is a chronic condition, something that has, that all of the current therapies have no real curative potential, but we're just managing symptoms until the condition or the disease eventually kills that patient. Gene therapy offers this promise of a curative potential. And so RegenxBio has an AAV platform, which is a viral vector platform that allows them to deliver functional copies of deficient genes, depending on the different conditions or different products. We have two products that are in mid to late development. RGX-314, which is not in the rare disease space, but it's in the quite common space, wet age-related macular degeneration, which is an ocular condition. And I can share, since it's public, we've recently partnered with AbbVie to bring this product through phase 3 and to the market. RGX-121 is the program I am working on currently, which is in development for a condition called mucopolysaccharidosis 2, or MPS 2. It's what's called a lysosomal storage disorder, which means that you are deficient in an enzyme that breaks down lysosomal storage material. And because of that deficiency, you get this accumulation of material in specific cells. A lot of these are in CNS, are in the CNS, but can also be in other parts of the body. For MPS II, it's primarily in the CNS. And like a lot of genetic conditions and a lot of lysosomal storage disorders, these disorders will kill patients by their late adolescence. So these are patients that are in dire need. And I, because of that, find it very valuable to work on these programs. We have a lot of products in earlier stages as well. One of probably my favorite program is the one that does, and which I have led for my whole time at RegenxBio, is a combination of the ocular space and rare disease space. One of the lysosomal storage disorders, which is called CLN2, actually affects not just the central nervous system, but also the ocular space. And so we have a product that has been formulated for, central nervous system delivery, but now also for ocular delivery to deliver this functional copy of the gene that is deficient. And this will not only allow, the CNS drug allows patients to actually live longer, but the ocular one allows them to not go blind. And so I think this is, understanding that some therapies, although they may not be curative, they may provide a quality of life that patients may not have. And so that's, I've really loved working on that program. That program is just, we're in the process of getting it into the clinic, going through CTA review with a few countries in Europe. But that's, it's been really exciting to work on that program. And so RegenxBio is, a little bit bigger also than Glyco. We are about 400 people. I joined RegenxBio as a fully remote employee. I was already living in Colorado when I interviewed early last year. And this is my first experience being a fully remote worker, having not been an in-person worker prior to that at this company. And that has come with its own set of unique challenges. It is something you need to, strategize around in terms of getting time with certain people, making sure you have visibility within your company, whether to, the people, not just the people you directly work with, but even thinking about, those and especially higher ranking people in your company. And I feel fortunate at RegenX. I work on a team, the regulatory team is roughly somewhere between 12 to 15 people. I work on a team that is incredibly supportive of everyone. And my boss is always finding opportunities for me to, get that visibility and to see, where I can shine within my company. And I think that's something I can't speak, emphasize, anymore. Working at a company where you have people that support you in your endeavors, there isn't unhealthy competition, especially within your team. I've had experiences where environments could show those types of characteristics, and it doesn't really help most people. Some people thrive in that environment. I am certainly not one of them. And I know that a lot of people that I was working with in those environments didn't like it. And so something to always, whether you're interviewing for a job or you've just started a job and you're kind of getting your feet wet and understanding where things, how people work, that's a really important thing to assess. You can love the work, you can love the technical aspects, but you got to work with your colleagues every single day. And so culture and a company's ability to allow you to grow and flourish, I think is just something that I can't stress enough as being a really important part of your job within a company. And so I wanted to, before I finish up and we can take some questions, I wanted to talk about like what is regulatory work. And I think one of the things that I have discovered over my time working, whether at Côté Orphan all the way up to now, is that the more, especially within regulatory strategy, the more you get into it and the higher up you go, there are a lot of pieces that are not concrete. You can't, it's not work where every day there's something easy to check off on a to-do list, but it's these long-term strategies. It's meeting with different groups to understand where they are in getting a submission together, or are we doing the right studies to make for the stage of development we're at. And it can feel at times, I have felt this, difficult, or you don't feel like you're accomplishing a lot because you can't check something off a list. And so one thing I've found in my role is you have to create those things for yourself. You have to make things into something list-like if you need that gratification like I do, of getting something done. And so, and when it comes to, for example, leading a global regulatory strategy for a trial that you're trying to ultimately get to market, having little checks like having submissions be your checklist is a great way to do that. Or making sure, saying I reviewed this document, now that's a checklist point. So there are ways you can do it and not get lost in the forest of everything, but really start to see the little details and the little successes. And that's been really important for me, and especially in times of high stress and lots of stuff to get done. It can feel really nice to have those accomplishments. And so leading a strategy for a trial can be, for me, sometimes assessing what countries we want to open our trial sites in. And when you're assessing that, you need to think about what are their regulatory requirements, and do we meet that bar? Do we need to make changes to something? Maybe they have more stringent requirements for your manufacturing process. Maybe they have more stringent requirements for what needs to be in your consent form for your patients. So all of these types of activities, all of these types of thoughts go into creating a global strategy, and all, underneath that umbrella of going to market. Where are you going to market? By the time you're doing your NDA or BLA or MAA, if it's Europe or any other country, by the time you're getting there, there's that planning starts. If it's a company that's well organized, that planning starts years ahead of time, ensuring that you're interacting with agencies, whether FDA or relevant ex-US competent authority, interacting with them and making sure they are aware of where you are in development, and getting their feedback on the choices you're going to be making for trial design or manufacturing changes. And so that's always in the back of your mind as a regulatory affairs professional, as you're laying out these strategies, even, not for a pivotal trial, even if it's a phase 2 trial, you need to be thinking about these things well ahead of time. So these are the types of little things that you're doing, that I'm doing all day. The more of the nitty gritty things that I still get to do. I still author designations. That's something always people see on my resume and point out, and they say, oh, we want to get this designation for this product. We want to get an orphan drug designation. We want to breakthrough therapy designation. And so I still, even now, author those. I've done that in my current role. But also now I'm doing a lot more review of submission documents. And these are not even traditionally regulatory documents, but I do a lot of review of protocols, ICFs, different, even our labels and our, pharmacy manual, things that are not traditionally regulatory documents, but need a regulatory eye. And so that's been that nitty gritty. I still get into the technical aspects, which I really enjoy. And then keeping track of compliance activities is probably the last big thing you do in regulatory. Compliance activities are things like annual reports. So when you have an IND open with FDA, every year you have to submit an annual report that updates FDA on the progress you're making in your trial, or if your trial is on hold, or or informing them that it's open in other countries, things like that. And then and there are these types of annual reports for all ex-US countries. And so that's an example, but keeping track of these regulatory compliance activities and ensuring that you're not only are they, being written, but ensuring that they're being delivered on time. And so I've talked a lot already about cross-functional meetings and things like that. I'll just reiterate that regulatory touches on every function. There's regulations for your clinical trials. There's regulations for how you're supposed to run your animal studies. There's regulations for your manufacturing specs and, and your process and what you need to provide to an authority. So I talk with people across functions every day. There are some people I talk to more than once a day. And so these, to reiterate also what KGI has taught me well and that I've continued to develop through my career is understanding how to speak to someone about regulatory work who maybe doesn't have all the information that you do, but also learning to listen to the SMEs that you're trying to get information from, and really hearing them, understanding what they're trying to share with you, and making sure they are supported, making sure that you have a good, thorough understanding of what they need from your function, and making sure that you can either take that back to your team or implement that information into your strategy. I know all of this is very like high level and not not very specific to the day-to-day things that I do. I'm happy to answer any questions about those things if anyone has those. And I think that's all I have. So
that's great, Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you guys.
You've sparked a lot of interest and questions here. And why don't we start off with Professor Joel West has a question for you. Wants to put you on the spot immediately.
Hey, Rebecca.
Oh, hi, Joel.
Yeah, good to see you again. Can you drop your screen, by the way, so we can see your...
I was gonna say, let me do that. I don't want to do a new share, but I want to. Oh, there we go. There we go.
Yeah, super. So Cliff has a question, which I'm sure is on everybody's mind, about what do you like about your job? But let me just kind of start out before you address his question. You talked about regulatory filings. You've got like an IND to put it in humans, an NDA or BLA for approval. You talked about special designations like orphan drug designation or fast track approval designation. And then you also talked about writing a protocol for a clinical trial or a preclinical trial. So those are three examples of medical writing that you do that have a regulatory filing associated with them. Now, the reason I'm asking this question is among your former classmates or the people that are here today, a lot of people would say, I don't want to go into regulatory. That's too boring. So can you talk about sort of the pros and cons, rewards and frustrations or challenges of just this particular type of a regulatory career, which is the different types of regulatory filings, what you find rewarding, what's tedious, or maybe what sort of personality traits or attributes you need to have for this be a good thing? Because I would say from my observation, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of our graduates start here, even if they don't stay here, because they get in the door and they show they can do a regulatory filing, and that's how they get the job, because the company needs people to do the regulatory filings.
Yeah. That's a good question. I'll answer. I'll answer in parts. So yeah, their regulatory work is first of all, is not for everyone. I'll start with that, and that's something that you have to, KGI can allow you to discover that, but even even joining a regulatory role and realizing that it's not for you happens to more people than probably you would think. And so, that's I'll start with that. And, I can speak for only myself, who I clearly have learned that I enjoy regulatory. But, even the things you enjoy have their downsides. So I think it's probably easier for me to start with even the cons. So cons of regulatory work, I'll repeat one thing I said, which is the fact that it can be very nebulous and not have something concrete can really, wear on me at times. It makes me feel like I'm not doing something some days, even when I've been working for 8 or 9 hours. So that has its cons for sure. Reviewing a protocol that's over 100 pages can get tedious and can get exhausting. Reviewing a clinical study report that's 1,000 pages is exhausting. And those are part, that's part of what you're going to have to be involved in. Not every piece of your work will give you that rewarding sense and that fulfilling sense. The other con, I will say, and I think I've now seen enough and talked to enough people who've been in industry longer than me to know that this is true for regulatory. We are often the people telling everyone to slow down, to spend more money to do studies that FDA is going to require of you. And if you don't, you will get, your BLA will maybe get a refuse to file, or your IND will be put on hold, or things like that. And there will always be functions, especially on more of the business side of your company, if you're working for a biotech, who are going to want to go as fast as possible for as cheap as possible. And learning how to communicate with people who have a very different set of priorities can be tough. I repeat myself in meetings all the time. And it's very annoying sometimes, but that's part of the politicking you have to do. I think in any job, you really do have to remember that this is why you were hired and you are the SME, and not everyone is going to respect that. But that's going to be true in any role. I know our non-clinical people will say we have to do a certain study a certain way, and they'll say, well, you need to do it at half the cost. How is that possible? That's on them to figure out. And sometimes that's not possible. So I think those are my biggest cons for working in regulatory. The rewarding parts, seeing an IND go through, seeing a CTA clear, I can't even tell you the great feelings you get. It's something where even though it takes a village to get these types of submissions in, people will always look at you as the person who led that effort. And it's really, it's very rewarding. I also am a problem solver. That's something I love to do in my work. And when it comes to regulatory strategy, that's how I view every development program I've ever worked on. You've got a set of data, you've got a directive of what you're supposed to do with it and what you're supposed to get out of an authority from it. And finding your way to do that is fun for me. Finding a novel way of saying, oh, we could do a study like this, and this would meet this requirement, but would allow us to go quicker. Doing that and having that success is very fun for me. I really like finding all the potential paths and narrowing them down to the one that fits best. And then outside of that, regulatory, maybe all functions touch on this, but I know in my work, I love to feel like because I'm involved in the clearing of an IND or the clearing of a BLA, it feels like I'm very heavily involved in getting this to patients. And that part I think about that all the time, especially working in rare disease with such a focus on patients and patient advocacy. Did I get all of that?
As much as you could at the time available. Thank you.
It's good to see you, Joel.
A couple of questions from the chat here. This is a good one. Is it common for people in your profession to change companies so frequently?
It's a very good question. I don't know if I couldn't say, this many % of people do it. I can say that among people I know, it's not uncommon. I think that's something that's changed a lot in the industry based on at least people I've worked with who are older, bosses I've had. A good boss, a very close friend now of mine who was a boss at Glycomimetics. When I was going to join RegenxBio, one of the big reasons, and I'll be honest about this, one of the big reasons outside of me wanting to go to gene therapy and wanting something different was also that they offered me a role that was significantly higher up in hierarchy than I was currently in.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't be the reason you take a job, but it's an absolutely important reason to take a job. And a lot of people in industry, from when I've spoken to, find that sometimes the best way to quickly move up is to switch companies. Yeah. A lot of times, you don't, especially at small companies, they don't necessarily just have roles open for you that are above you. They may not have the money to pay someone to be in that role. I know at Glyco, there was someone who was already, like my boss was a director level, and then they had a vice president, and they didn't really need someone that was higher than my level. And so in going to RegenxBio, I was able to get into a role that was higher up and allowed me, I think, to have a lot more responsibility. It's definitely challenged me in a way that I was not in that role. And so I think to bring it all together, to answer your question, I think although it is common, or it's not, I'll say it's not uncommon, but you should always think about the reasons you're leaving a job, and what that other job can offer you, and will that last? Like making more money, having a higher role, that's great. It is great, but you'll get used to it. You'll get used to that salary. You'll get, and if the work is boring or the people are not interesting or they're not good to work with, you're stuck with that. And to add on to that, it's certainly not frowned upon to move a lot in industry. I will also say that. A lot of my colleagues have bumped around a lot, and it's never something that's asked of them unless it's, you're spending, a year or less at a company.
Right.
Then you might get some questions on why you're jumping ship so quickly.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right on target with my experience, that it's not uncommon, and it offers opportunities for more rapid professional growth in our industry, and not all opportunities are going to be available at a given company that you're at. So there's also the fact that mergers and acquisitions are a very real component of working in our industry. It's super common. Even larger companies might get acquired, or things can change quite rapidly to a situation that's just not quite as fun anymore, or not as professionally rewarding. And so you might look to move, or there's an acquisition and the acquiring company has all of the positions filled at their company already, and they don't need any new people, and so you go on to other things. That's one of the things that I think people need to have in mind when they go into the pharmaceutical industry is that merger acquisition is happening all the time. You have to get used to taking a little bit of risk here and there, and change needs to be your friend, I would say. We've got another good question here in the chat. Would you recommend a career path in regulatory affairs, starting with working at the FDA, for example, to understand their perspective and expectations before going into industry, I guess, is part of the question.
Absolutely. It can be hard. It's actually quite difficult to get a job at the FDA. And one of the reasons for that is the experience you'll get from the FDA is unlike any other and is incredibly valuable, because having that insight into how they operate, knowing people at FDA as well, is just it's invaluable. It is invaluable. There's no way you can put a price on it. And to be frank, you will get paid more by people in industry if you've worked at FDA. That it is a skill set that industry pays very well for. My boss is former FDA. We just hired someone else who's former FDA. It happens all the time. So if you can get a job at FDA, especially early on in your career, you're setting yourself up really well.
Another question from the chat relates to what's the success rate at getting drugs approved, and what are the implications of working in the rare disease area? You know, what's the financial basis for developing drugs in rare diseases?
Getting drugs approved is, I don't have the stats, but it is small. So with each stage in development, you see a huge drop off of products. So, you know, you have a lot of companies that can have a product that clears to IND, but you know, there's some that drop off there. Your non-clinical can't match what is needed. Early clinical development, a lot of people drop off there. Your drug doesn't work like they thought it would in humans. Phase 3, probably the biggest, maybe one of the biggest points that people can, you know, lose out, which is mostly that maybe you didn't design your trial right. Maybe you thought you saw something that a bigger population of people doesn't show anymore. And so it is really hard. And then even just getting from a good controlled phase 3 trial to market is also incredibly challenging. There are a lot of requirements. You know, there's a reason we all feel like an FDA seal of approval makes me feel like I can take something, is because the bar is very high. Mm-hmm. Working in rare diseases and the financial implications of that. I mean, working in rare diseases is, I just think is kind of fun, because it's a lot of figuring out how you can maneuver within FDA's framework to get a drug approved, knowing that the patient population is small, knowing that you won't, you know, it's hard to recoup that cost. And that FDA has created a lot of programs, and now granted, they do also say a lot that maybe doesn't always go into practice, but working within that framework, I find to be just, it's challenging and fun. Working within a large disease population also comes with its own unique challenges. I mean, you kind of don't have any FDA programs or like big help. So that has its own challenges. You don't get to cut as many corners, I'll say. But in rare diseases, FDA really does try to work with you to get your product approved, or at least just getting it to the next stage of development. And I find it fun as a regulator to work with health authorities that are really trying to get you to get you to a successful place.
Right, and there are incentives for developing drugs in rare diseases, right? And that's part of the regulatory strategy that regulatory affairs folks can help companies out with. Yeah, I think the estimates are 10 to 15% of the drugs that start in human testing eventually get approved. So it's very low amount of drugs that actually get approved, and it's about $1.5 to $2 billion to bring a regular drug to market. So
yeah,
let's see here. Since you're coordinating so much, how many different fields do you have to be familiar with? I think part of the inherent in that question maybe is therapeutic areas. I don't know. How much, and I think another piece of this question is, as a regulatory affairs person, do you really need to have a scientific background? You talked a lot about the science.
Yeah. I mean, people do it without one, but it's rare. It does really help because you're reading so many documents that are very technical when it comes to the science, that without my science background, it would have been really challenging, especially in the early part of my career. When I was doing medical writing, trying to analyze source documents, maybe it was study reports or an investigator's brochure, trying to glean the information I needed to write the application, and also understanding that data, where might the question marks arise for a health authority reviewing it. I do think having a science background does really help. That being said, in terms of therapeutic area expertise, I was in a small molecule company, Glycomimetics, and moved to gene therapy. And that was something I had to, starting in that job, learn a lot more about. I knew in theory how gene therapy worked, but once you really get into the nitty-gritty of it, and especially from a regulatory perspective, what is required of a gene therapy is so much different than what is required for a small molecule. And I'll say this, I should really say small molecule and for biologics. So, biologics have, a lot more variance even between just batches of the drug. They are more complex molecules that have more complex interactions going on within your body. There's a lot more risk of for an immune reaction, especially if you're thinking about gene therapies with viral vectors. So there are a lot of things you have to become familiar with when you're in a new therapeutic area. But it's like any job, when you join, the first maybe 6 months, maybe more, depending on the job, is like drinking from a fire hose. You may not have that technical knowledge. You're also trying to learn where the programs are at within that company and where you fit in. And so I would say when it comes to therapeutic areas, don't let that dissuade you. If you find a cool job that has some type of science that you're not really familiar with, that's not going to be something that they're necessarily going to say, oh, well, this person can't have this job. I was very clear that I had no gene therapy experience when I joined Regenx, and now I know a lot more. So
yeah. We have an audience question from Rom.
Hi, I was the one who asked the question about the fields. I had another question that was kind of related to it. I'm currently I'm pre-med for a cardiothoracic surgeon. The reason I was asking that was if I wanted to, I guess, switch careers. I was trying to figure out how applicable would my current training be to this kind of a program, or if more of a business training would be more applicable, and then learning the science kind of later on. Do you think that this is more of a business field, or do you think that your science background is more beneficial?
I think my science background is more beneficial. Business, I'd say the only other field that could contribute as much would be some kind of legal background, being able to read regulations, like CFRs or guidance documents, and through all the haze of just endless information, being able to pull out what you need from that, what you're seeking, is a skill that like legal people, from all the people I've interacted with in our company, are really skilled at. But I think science or legal for regulatory are probably the best backgrounds to come from. Now, you could theoretically come from any background. It just might make it harder to break into it.
Okay, thank you very much for answering my question.
Yeah, of course.
And of course, there are a lot of physicians that work in the pharmaceutical, biotech, medical device industry, of course, and a lot of those individuals will be in clinical development and drug safety or medical device safety and pharmacovigilance. Let's see. Does it help to have regulatory courses? This is another one from Professor West here. I don't know where that one came from.
I'll say it does, but don't expect that those courses are going to teach you everything you need to know. You're still going to go into a job, and regulatory in practice is going to feel very different than what than what it was in a class. But that's true of a lot of different areas, not just regulatory. I felt that strongly going in, but the basis of knowledge you'll gain from those classes, just even the lingo, even just understanding the words people use and the buzzwords of how, of development, is very valuable. And you'll find that when you're trying to learn these other things and trying to learn what it's like in practice, you will fall back on that knowledge all the time and build on it in your job.
Can I ask a follow-up? So
Yes.
Now that you're on the other side of the table, if somebody comes to you with a degree in regulatory from a school you don't know, what are you looking for them to show to you that tells you that they're prepared to do an entry-level regulatory job? In other words, what should they have accomplished in their coursework that makes you comfortable that they're ready to start in an initial position in regulatory affairs?
That is a very good question. I have not yet hired someone or interviewed someone for an entry-level position, but if I were to look at a resume for that type of position, I do think, and maybe this colors my previous answer, I think I would look for a science background. It wouldn't need to be required, but I would look for it, and it would be a big plus. Having the experience of some kind of writing, whether you can talk about some type of writing you've done, or somehow you've been able to, showing that you can do that type of exercise where you read through a document and can pull something out of it, synthesize something out of it, I think is very valuable. But it's for an entry-level position, I think it's more outside of a resume. I think it comes from talking with people. I think interviews are, if you have the science background in general, or you come from a certain regulatory program, you're likely to get an interview. And in that interview, I would more be looking for your understanding of how regulatory works, and like what cross-functionally you need to be prepared to do. And not, that doesn't mean like you need to be like, oh, I would do this to get us all the way to marketing, but showing that you have the ability to that you would rely on other people to provide the information that you don't have, which I think in interviews, a lot of people will try to be like, oh, I would know everything and I would solve this problem all myself. That's a big red flag. Like, no, you're not going to solve anything by yourself in regulatory. You will always be relying on other people. let me think, what else would be an ability to honestly ask really good questions in your interview. I think as a regulatory person, one of the things you need to have as just in your skill set is thinking critically about everything, thinking about the questions that could come up. And that doesn't just apply necessarily to a regulatory submission, but when I go to jobs now, I have a set of questions in mind that I really want to understand about that company, or hearing something that they say and then asking a follow-up question about it. I'm always thinking in that way. And I look for that with people who are interviewing, always asking those critical thinking questions. So that's also
how time flies when you have an interesting alumni speaker here. I guess we're out of time. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
All right. Well, I really want to thank Rebecca for her time and her valuable insight, and really appreciate her being with us this afternoon. So I don't know if you have any closing comments from our admissions folks.
No, just thank you. Thanks for listening to me talk about myself. I really, I really, I enjoy talking about the work that I do because I find it, again, very valuable and rewarding. I don't know what the best forum is, Larry, but I'm happy to share my email or LinkedIn or anything like that. Please reach out to me. Happy to just chat if you had any questions that you didn't get answered, or, and just, anything. Happy to talk.
That's great. We'll guide people in the right direction if they have further questions for you. And thank you for offering that. We appreciate it.
Thank you both so much for being here. Thank you, Rebecca, for the presentation. And thank you, Dr. Davis, for moderating. Hello to all of our other faculty and staff that are here. Hello, President Schuster, Dr. West. I know I saw Emerald in here as well. And thank you so much to all of our students that tuned in today. If you have any questions going forward, feel free to contact the admissions team, where you can get you connected with Rebecca and point you towards the recording for this as well. Yeah, thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. If you're in person for summer, come get some ice cream on campus too. So
great. Thanks. Take care. All right.
Thank you. Bye.